The first thing I will tell you is this. My phone rang at 2:13 a.m., and on the screen was her name, the name of the woman they wrapped in linen and put in the ground last month. That should make sense to you and to me, but it doesn't. Not yet. I was halfway between the sink and the bedroom, the house full of the small, domestic noises that become loud when you are alone. The refrigerator humming like a tired engine, the radiator tapping its slow metallic code. I had been trying to sleep for hours, counting nothing but the flitter of dust in the moonlight through the slatted blinds. The room smelled faintly of coffee and stale lilies, the smell from the funeral arranged in the corner of my living room, a cardboard box of wilted stems I hadn't thrown away. When my phone buzzed on the counter, I assumed it was a wrong number, a prank, something stupid to be deleted in the morning. Then I saw her name. Not just Mom, her full name, the one we used for forms and protests and every paper that made her feel real. The photo beside it was the last one they had taken of her alive, a dim smile in a sunlit doorway. My hand did something I could not explain. It reached, and the buzzing stopped. The screen went black. For a second, my whole body thought I had imagined the call. That brief, bright hope is something I can still taste, like copper on the tongue. I told myself every rational thing. Caller ID can be faked. It could be someone cruel, making a joke. Maybe the hospital had mixed up their lists. I set the phone down and turned to the dark hallway, more to prove to myself that the house was still ordinary than because I expected anything else. The hallway was a low tunnel of shadow. The plaster seemed closer than it should be, as if the house had learned to breathe around me. Then the answering machine clicked on in the living room, not the phone in my hand, but the old landline on the bookshelf, the one my mother used to keep for emergencies. It hadn't worked in months. I heard the hollow spin of the tape, a tiny mechanical groan, like a throat clearing. A voice came through that device, and for a moment my ears could not believe what they were hearing. It was hers, threaded with all the small inflections that belonged to a lifetime of bedtime stories and scoldings. It was softer than memory, like a page turned slowly. "Hello?" she said. The single syllable hung between the radiator ticks and the hum of the night, and the word was wrong in my mouth when I repeated it out loud. I moved toward the living room, because you move toward the place where voices come from, even when you know you shouldn't. The box of lilies leaned like a small, dead audience. The air tasted colder there, as if the house had borrowed winter from somewhere else. I didn't run. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe because running would have been admitting it was happening, that the world had folded in on itself and the familiar furniture of my life had rearranged into something else. Instead, I stood with the knob of the living room lamp in my palm and watched the shadow in the hall breathe. The voice had come through the landline again, not recorded this time, but live, thin as thread and closer, as if she were leaning against the bookshelf where the phone sat. "Did you forget how to listen?" she asked, and the question was private in a way that made the hairs on my arms count themselves. It knew things, names I hadn't said aloud in months. The smell of a sweater I had shoved into the back of a drawer. Cheap wool that still carried the perfume of the florist and the hospital antiseptic. The voice was patient, like someone reading a long, slow list. My chest tightened around a sound I couldn't identify. Maybe it was air. Maybe it was a sob I wouldn't let myself have. The answering machine light blinked even though there was no tape whirring now. When I reached for the handset, the skin of my fingers felt foreign, as if the phone were warmed by someone else's blood. I told myself that touching it would prove nothing. That touching it would not change the string of ridiculous facts unspooling through that quiet living room. Then the photographs on the mantel tilted. Not all at once, that would have been cinema, but a slow, indecisive lean like a tide, reluctantly revealing a drowned face. The frames made a tiny, dry creak against the wood. I remember thinking, with that numb clarity fear gives you, about physics and gravity and other laws that should still be in force. The portrait of my mother caught the lamp light, and for a 6-second, her painted smile looked like a mouth closing over something wet. I could feel the house listening now. The radiator stopped its tapping. The refrigerator held its breath. Even the dust motes seemed to hover in a fixed, deliberate pattern. The voice told me small things. It told me the color of my shoelaces, the name of the barista who always undercharged me, the exact word I had used in an argument 2 years ago that still hid like a burr under my skin. For each truth it revealed, the room felt a degree colder. And then it changed. The tenderness thinned and sharpened, like someone trimming a photograph's edges. "You left the window open the night the fever came," she said, and the words clung to the glass. Outside, a distant dog scratched at a fence, its sound drowned in the house's new silence, but close enough to remind me that the world continued somewhere past my walls. "You forgot to say goodbye," she continued. "You thought burying me would close the door." Her voice stopped being a memory and became a command. The lights in the hallway flickered, slow and private, not bright enough to read by and not dark enough to hide. On the far wall, something, a shadow or a person, moved with a slow, wrong gait, like the way a marionette learns to limp. I backed up until my shoulder met the kitchen counter. I could feel the grain of the wood press into skin. My mouth tasted of metal and regret. Something scrabbled at the back door, nails against old paint. A sound of the earth being disturbed. I opened the back door because there was nothing else I could do. The handle was slick with a cold I felt in my teeth, as if the weather had entered the house and decided to stay. Night pressed against the threshold. My breath made a faint, short cloud that vanished before I could name it. The porch light, which had always blinked uselessly for years, burned steady and low, as if someone had chosen this moment to be kind. The smell that hit me was not the perfume of lilies, but a deep metallic sweetness and damp earth, the exact smell of the grave at the funeral, thick and stubborn in the nose. There was a shallow hole in the yard, rimmed by clods that had been moved with a hand that did not care for neatness. Something had been dragged out of it. A single slipper lay half buried in the soil, one of those cheap things she wore to shuffle to the kitchen. Ironic, then, that the slipper looked unused, as if it had been waiting for feet that would never stop. I remember thinking, absurdly, about garden gloves and the correct way to tuck soil back in, as if the world could be made orderly by small tools. Then a hand, pale, wrong in the joints, the skin like paper that had been handled too often, pushed through the soft earth. It wore a bracelet I recognized, chain links she used to fidget with when she was nervous, the one I had slipped off her wrist the night the fever took her. The fingers flexed and left small smudges in the dirt like signatures. I wanted to step back. My feet had different plans. My toes found the cold porch boards, and my knees remembered every prayer I had never said. I crouched. The face that emerged was more shadow than bone at first. Cheek hollows where warmth should be, hair plastered to a forehead like wet rope. When her eyes opened, they were not the eyes I had kissed in hospitals and at doorways. They were empty wells that reflected the porch light as if it were a moon in a well. The first sound she made was not a voice, but a small, wet intake, the sound of someone tasting rain. Behind me, the answering machine clicked and played my voice, slowed and smeared, like a record you don't remember recording. "Forgive me," I heard myself say, and the words were not pleading so much as offering inventory, a list of moments I had mislaid. The voice on the machine became a map to the thing before me, every admission a step she used to climb out of the ground. She smiled then, not the soft, remembered smile, but a thin, patient curl that belonged to someone who had rehearsed joy and found it inadequate. She reached up and touched my face with fingers that smelled of wet soil and lilies and iron. The skin where she touched hummed under her touch, like a string under a bow. The world narrowed to the small, precise weight of that contact. I felt my pulse in my teeth, sharp and obscene, as if my body had become a bell and someone else was learning how to ring it. "You finally came back," she said softly, and her voice was both hers and mine. She closed her hand over my mouth. She was smiling with my mouth.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.